Hi, and welcome to this short video focused on the topic of risk management or managing risk, with a specific focus on what is organisational risk, and this is for core management concepts. So what is business risk then? Let's start there. When we hear the word risk, we're often inclined to view it as a negative result of taking action. Oh, if I do this, this could be risky, this dangerous thing could happen. So for example, it would be risky to take on that new client, they're notoriously bad at paying, would be an example of the way that managers or people more generally express the idea of risk as being dangerous, problematic, and an issue. Risk is likely to come about as a result of taking an action and something then going wrong. That's also a common way of thinking about it. So then we think, oh, we did the wrong thing. However, the reality is that organisational risk is more complicated than this, as you should have already seen in the notes. And risks come from not taking action too. So for example, what business could you miss out on by not taking on that new client, even if they're a bad payer? What are the consequences in this situation of doing nothing? So risk can come about from inaction or the wrong action just as much as it can from taking action in the first place. Risk management then aims to balance threats and opportunities that organisations face, and therefore thinking not just about risk as threats, but thinking also about it as opportunities or missed opportunities. Threats are the risks that an organisation might not prosper and survive in the long term, whereas opportunities need to be exploited in order to remain competitive. And the risks of missed opportunities need to be taken seriously by companies. That's because organisations that manage risks effectively are much more likely to protect themselves from problems and succeed in growing their business. And the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, recognizes good risk management as a key feature of an organization. So understanding risk then, what is risk? Well, the first thing we need to say about risk is it's not the same thing to everybody. It's a highly subjective construct. What does subjective mean? Well, if I ask you the question, are holidays nice? You might say, yes, they are wonderful. They're a great opportunity to rest, relax, see friends. I love holidays. Your colleague, however, may see holidays as a waste of their time. They love work. They want to be at work. It's where they socialise and they prefer not to take their holiday. I know, to me, that sounds bizarre too, but I do have at least one friend who is like that. So the answer will depend on who you ask, and the same is true with risk. Our view of what risk is depends very much on who we are and the context that we're in. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. So our opinions as people and our values as people influence the ways that we see and measure risks. And this is not just about ourselves, but it's also about over time and the way our companies perceive risks too. So what is considered acceptable in terms of risk changes over time. At one point, it was very much an acceptable risk to go on the tube in London not wearing a face mask. Now, for many people, even though coronavirus, the situation changes all the time. And so when I say this, it might be out of date. It's considered a more acceptable thing to now be wearing a face mask if you don't feel well or if you want to stop transmission. So different people, departments and companies and over time have different lenses through which they see risk as well. So a facilities department, so they're the people who look after a building, may have new health and safety requirements to worry about. And so their focus will be about health and safety. Whereas an IT department might be much more concerned about improving security to prevent a data breach, and their focus will be on that kind of security. So who we are will shape what we see as imminent and problematic risks. It almost changes the glasses that we look at the world through. Changing social pressures also influence internal views. So recycling and reduction of energy usage have become areas of opportunity for facilities departments to try to exploit because there is increasing legislation and social pressure to reduce energy consumption. Risk perception, as I mentioned before, also changes over time. So it's iterative, meaning that over time we reassess risk based on the circumstances which surround us. If it was fine today, so if there were no problems today, we will assign a slightly lower level of threat to upcoming risks. And over time, we come to believe a familiar activity is no longer a significant risk, regardless of statistical evidence. So if there was a plane crash yesterday, flying seems riskier today, even though plane flight is one of the safest ways to travel. You can see heuristics at work here, which you'll have looked at. So you can see that idea that our mental shortcuts, we have experience that tells us that flying in a plane is safe. The stats tell us that, but the availability bias helps us to recall news stories of plane crashes, particularly if they were recent, and alter our perception of the risk. Risks themselves also change over time. Our awareness isn't static, and our knowledge changes as risks emerge. So before 2011, companies weren't aware of the potential disruption that volcanic ash could have on air transport, so it was not considered a threat. Since the disruption caused by the Icelandic volcano in 2011, which left my husband stranded in New York, what a terrible place to be stranded, I wish it had been me, this threat is regularly now considered by firms that rely on airline passengers or on air freight. So they include it in their risk statements, the idea of volcanic disruption. We're likely to see similar with regard to COVID-19 and other pandemics as companies start to factor in this sort of potential pandemic risk into their operating model. So hopefully you found this helpful for explaining that rather tricky concept of what is risk and why risk isn't the same for everyone. Thanks for listening. Bye.